Elizabeth, we're live.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the Federal Treasurer of Socialist Action, a member of the NDP Socialist Caucus Steering Committee, and your host for this webcast. We acknowledge that we are hosting this event on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island known as North America. That includes the unceded territories of the Mississauga of the New Credit, the Wendat and Haudenosaunee people, in a place called Toronto. Today, I'm speaking to you from Jamaica, where the indigenous Taino and Arawak-speaking people began arriving here 4,000 years ago, but were wiped out by the European colonial powers. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no real reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporation and returning them to the commons. Tonight's webcast is titled, How Socialists Are Changing the New Brunswick NDP, featuring interim leader of the New Brunswick NDP, Christopher Thomas, plus John Nuttal, Natasha Akhtar, and Chris Wanamaker. Chris T. will speak for about 25 minutes. Natasha, Chris W., and John will each speak for 5 to 7 minutes. Then we will take questions from the online audience. Audience members can submit a question by accessing the webcast directly from YouTube and by typing the question directly onto the chat column. They can direct their question to a specific person if they'd like, or to all three. If you like this webcast, please subscribe to the Socialist Action YouTube channel. If you agree with what you hear during this program, please join Socialist Action or sign up at our website, www.socialistaction.ca, or by calling us at 647-986-1917. Easy to remember, 1917 was the year of the Russian Revolution. So let's begin. Chris Thompson is the interim leader of the New Brunswick NDP. That's the New Democratic Party. Someday he'll be a teacher, but now he's working on building a working class movement in New Brunswick as a member of Socialist Action and the NDP Socialist Caucus. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and give a short presentation on what Socialist Action, Socialist Caucus of the NDP is, and how we're attempting to affect change, as well as give a little bit of history, because I'm sure plenty of the audience isn't super aware of what the history of the New Brunswick NDP looks like, and what the history of the socialist movement and the Socialist Caucus in the New Brunswick NDP or in New Brunswick look like. So yeah, we'll begin, and I'm going to start with that history so everyone knows how we got to where we are. First things first, the NDP in New Brunswick has never formed government or official opposition. There's only been a couple times where they've ever got a seat in the legislature, and there have been very, very rare cases where they've been a major political figure that's got any attention from the government or the media. So it's not like other places in Canada where they've seen a lot of success. So we have to know we're coming at it from that perspective and see kind of how we got there, see why we haven't seen much success, to figure out how the socialist movement can incorporate ourselves within that, and how to improve and make things better going forward. So we're going to start right at the beginning. In 1902, a gentleman by the name of Henry Stewart organized the first socialist party in New Brunswick. It was called the Fredericton Socialist League. Stewart was the president, and his friend Martin Butler was secretary of that party. It wasn't a party that was big enough, the Fredericton Socialist League, that it felt it was going to be able to win elections on its own. So what it did was it supported other candidates and tried to move them to their positions. In particular, in the early 20th century, we had the United Farmer and Independent Labor candidates. that the Federation Socialist League supported, and they actually managed to get 11 of those elected between the United Farmer and Independent Labour candidates in the 1920 provincial election. And for all of what would be the NBNDP's history, this is the time they saw the most success, was working in a coalition with other people. Later, Stewart came to be a key figure in creating what I'm sure most people know, the Canadian Commonwealth Federation, the CCF in New Brunswick. Unlike elsewhere in Canada, the CCF was never electorally successful, their height being the 1944 provincial election, where they achieved 11.7% of the vote and no seats. In 1961, along with the CCF across the country, they retired, and the New Democratic Party was created as a union of socialists and trade unionists. A lot of people from the earlier Fredericton Socialist League, independent labor, farmer candidates, and people in the CCF all came together to work in the New Brunswick NDP. It was really slow going starting out. The NBNDP did not run any candidates in the 1963 election and only ran 3 candidates in the 1967 election. The federal party's focus was elsewhere, and it didn't have the grassroots movement to drive up support in the province that they wanted. Early on, there was just simply not a lot of energy in the party. Then comes a little interesting time in our period called the New Brunswick Waffle. The waffle, which was Canada-wide, was a socialist but also Canadian nationalist and Quebec sovereigntist wing of the NDP. They actually succeeded in New Brunswick in the 1971 convention in passing their manifesto. This led to the NBNDP actually coming together and getting some work done for the first time by booting them out of the party. The party's centrist and labor wings came together because they were worried about some of the stuff the Waffle was pushing, and they organized to push back against that radical wing of the party. They were successful. In 1982 and 1984, the NBNDP won their first 2 seats with this new centrist wave, only to have one candidate end up defecting to the Liberal parties. And another interesting piece of New Brunswick history is in 1987, Frank McKenna's Liberals won over 60% of the vote and every single seat in the legislature. So up till this point, we've had the NBNDP grow as a socialist party, or be founded as a socialist party, have them not form a lot of energy, have a new socialist movement in the Waffle get booted out of the party, and then when they finally got their stuff together, they were able to get 2 more centrist candidates elected, and 1 defected to the Liberals. They get wiped out in the next election. So they're not seeing a lot of success, and there's a lot of party infighting in the first, what would be 20 years of the party's existence. And then comes who would be a household name in New Brunswick politics. After the election in 1988, Elizabeth Weir was elected the party leader. Frank McKenna did something that I think he deserves credit for in allowing opposition leaders to speak in the legislature when there was no opposition parties. Not even the Conservatives had a seat in the legislature. So this was actually the first time the New Brunswick NDP was on a level playing field with the rest of the opposition. They were able to go in the legislature and speak on many different issues. Elizabeth Weir was very, very effective because she previously was a lawyer and had a lot of speaking experience. And so the media and the ministers eventually started referring to her as the leader of the official opposition in New Brunswick, and that led to her personal popularity being high enough that she was able to win her seat in the 1991 election. She kept winning her seat over and over again until in 2004, she announced that she'd stepped down. Elizabeth Weir was not as far left as the New Brunswick Socialist Caucus is, but she also wasn't centrist by any means either. She certainly pushed a lot of social justice issues, women's equality issues, to the forefront of politics, and without her work, the New Brunswick politics wouldn't be where it is today. However, as far as internally in the NBNDP, that personal popularity never led to support for the New Brunswick NDP. And when Elizabeth Weir stepped down in 2004, 2005, the party was left without a clear leader. We were never able to get any extra seats. And after Elizabeth Weir left, we lost about half of our vote share, falling to the 5% that the NBNDP has got in many elections, because there wasn't a clear leader. We didn't have a clear message, a way to differentiate ourselves from the rest of the parties in New Brunswick. From that, we went from a couple more leaders, Alison Brewer and Roger Duguay, who Alison Brewer was really good on LGBTQ policies, abortion access, many other issues, but lacked a lot of the political experience to sum up a lot of votes. And Roger Duguay was kind of the first in what we'll see as being the modern issues. So fast forwarding to today, of the New Brunswick NDP. So Roger Duguay, when he was elected leader after the 2006 election, really wanted to push the party in a sense of centrist third way policies that we saw with Tony Blair and the Labour Party in the UK. Really started adopting that. Once he steps down, we have another permanent leader who fully embraces that in Dominic Carty. Now, Dominic Carty reshuffled the entire executive of the New Brunswick NDP and really decided that the party was going to abandon its even social justice and economic justice roots and adopt these third way policies, basically saying that we needed to be more fiscally conservative than the New Brunswick Liberals and Conservatives, which is horrifying to think about, because they're quite fiscally conservative even by Canadian standards. So the New Brunswick NDP was renamed the New Democratic Party of New Brunswick and fully embraced third way policies from 2011 onwards. To give some examples, in the 2014 platform, on page 1, it included plans to cut government departments by 40% and to end the Liberal and Tory habit of pretending that government create jobs, which for an NDP anywhere in Canada is surprising, to say the least. Carty gets a lot of credit because he was able to modernize and organize the party and achieve up to 15% of the vote, but it is worth sharing that during that time he took over $20,000 in Irving money. And if you're familiar with New Brunswick politics at all, you know that you know that this is how the Liberals and Conservatives have been funded throughout every election in modern history. So Carty came with a lot of money and organizational skills. He was able to run ads. He was able to paint a picture, just become a professional political party almost overnight by taking all these political insiders and getting them involved. But the problem with having a non-ideological and someone who's just trying to be electorally successful, taking money from who cares where, is that eventually you might be in a position where you're willing to compromise your values for more electoral success. And we saw that happen after Carty gets, and granted, deserves some credit, 15% of the vote, no seats still in the legislature. Dominic Carty defects to the Progressive Conservative Party and currently sits as the education minister for the Conservative government here in New Brunswick. So our leader defected to the Conservative Party. It is, to say it damaged the party would be understating it. No matter if you're a centrist, if you're part of organized labor, if you're a socialist, however you label yourself, if you think you fit in the NDP, bringing all of that organization into it and then just leaving really did a lot of damage to the party, because all of the structure that you have, you no longer have the people doing the work to do that and the funding necessary to keep things going. So, fast forward to today. You know where we've gone? We basically have gone from introducing as a socialist party to never having the energy to get our feet off the ground to being plagued by third way centrists and never achieving electoral success outside of Elizabeth Weir, who was very personally popular. So today, after the party was propped up by corporate and big money interest, and then that was taken away, the party essentially toppled like a house of cards. In the last two provincial elections, we got 5% of the vote and then less than 2% of the vote. This is the power vacuum that the party has basically seen, where the Socialist Caucus, which was founded in January of 2020, decided they can organize and they can build a movement around an actual ideology that will offer people a second chance here in New Brunswick and offer the NDP a reason to exist. Because in any local media right now, essentially the conversation is does the NDP have a reason to exist? And getting 2% of the vote when the federal party and other provincial parties are much more successful, although I don't like to say it, it's a fair question to ask. And the Socialist Caucus answer has been the reason for the NDP to exist needs to be as an answer to all the centrist and right-wing powers in New Brunswick. We need to provide an actual left-wing solution that people aren't getting elsewhere. If you're not familiar with New Brunswick politics, we have 4 political parties in the legislature right now. We have the Liberals and Conservatives, but we also have the Green Party successful here, and we have a right-wing populist party called the People's Alliance that are successful here. And so the Socialist Caucus has basically said, we cannot look at the political spectrum and say what we need is another centrist party, because we have that. We have a center left party in the Greens, we have a centrist party in the Liberals, and we have 2 right wing to center right wing parties in the Conservatives and People's Alliance. We need to build up and offer people something different. So after the 2020 snap election, where we got under 2% of the vote, interim leader Mackenzie Thompson stepped down, and myself, Chris Thompson, was acclaimed as interim leader with the support of the Youth Caucus, the Socialist Caucus, and party executive member Don Paulin, who was in a previous interim leadership race and was the second place candidate. So what does the Socialist Caucus do? The Socialist Caucus was formed with the help of Socialist Action members Chris Wanamaker, Barry Weisletter, and other socialists across New Brunswick, like John Nuttal. So the caucus believes that only by differentiating ourselves from the centrist parties in New Brunswick can the NDP prove it has a right to exist. The failures of centrist and right-wing candidates to establish seats in the past shows that there's a limit on how much support the NDP will ever be able to get in the province for those policies. Even when we saw someone like Elizabeth Weir, who had a lot of personal support, there was never a party support there. We were never able to get more than one seat in the legislature. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we do differently? Where do we go from here? And I believe, and I think most members of the NDP Socialist Caucus believe, that the party cannot be built off the backs of either personal popularity from a leader or individual candidates, or, of course, we can't be in a position where the party is accepting dark money. The only time the party ever in its history saw any success was essentially before the founding of the NDP in the very first days, when it had that grassroots movement electing independent labor and farmer candidates, that it worked right at the ground level to help get elected. And what that is that's coalition building and actually supporting grassroots movements in the province. It's not necessarily always saying we need to come together and push super hard on our social values and say that we're willing to get a low percentage of the vote if we only ever support people whose number one priority is socialism. It's saying, well, who are our allies? Are environmentalists our allies? Are labor activists our allies? Is the feminist movement our allies? We need to work with them. We can make our case for socialism and why that's best, but we need to build a coalition of working people who hold our values, because there's obviously a lot of people nowadays who have who are in a position where they can't even think about politics. If you're Indigenous in New Brunswick, you have to be worried about yourself or your family members possibly going missing or being murdered without anyone looking into it. If you're a woman in New Brunswick, there's the hard truth that you're gonna experience lower wages and less promotion opportunities in your line of work. And when things like that happen to people, they're unable to focus on politics. And as much as I want to say the first thing we need to do is go to the legislature and wave our red flags and say we need a socialist revolution today, that's unfortunately the people of New Brunswick are not in that position yet. So what we need to do is we need to start forming coalitions and working with groups of people, cooperatives, unions, environmentalists, and that way we can differentiate ourselves from all the other political parties, which are either focused on being wholly corrupt or being too ideological. The good news is that although the NDP is in a weak position electorally, we're seeing a lot of this grassroots movement building up right now. We've reached out to groups that represent over 300,000 New Brunswickers, and to put it in perspective, that's almost a third of our population, or over a third. And we group up with all these organizations that work with all these people and combine our alliances. We have the key labor leaders in the party have never abandoned us, which they deserve a lot of credit for. And we want to work with them, the social justice movement, and the growing wave and the growing interest for socialist politics that we're talking about in all these socialist action meetings, webcasts. We need to keep building our movement together. But what we want to do differently is reach out to all these different organizations. And the Socialist Caucus has been super, super helpful with that. So that's what we're trying to do. And this is how we found success in electing an interim leader. It's how we found success in having people legitimize us. It is by both sticking to our values and saying what we think is important and what we think matters most, but also listening to other people's priorities about, are they really worried about the environment? Are they really worried about not having a union contract for 4 years. These things are really important and affect people's daily lives. And if we keep going, the Socialist Caucus will be in a position to work with everyone else to revive the New Brunswick New Democratic Party in the future. I have no doubt. The thing I want to end on is, as much as a lot of people would like to say every political party needs to moderate itself or be willing to accept money from other sources if it's for the greater good, we have to stand by our values and decide that we are going to build a coalition of working people who've had enough. If we don't do that, if we don't work together and find a way to come together and find a way to stop fighting with other people who agree with us on 70-80% of things, we're gonna fade into nothingness. And this isn't just the New Brunswick NDP, this is any left movement across the country. So if you're in a small organization, I would like my pitch to be, find other small organizations you can work with. Even if their thing isn't your most important thing, maybe that's your priority 10, priority 11. If you still think you hold the core set of values with the people, work with them, invite them to join your group together, because then you'll actually build a movement that can get in the legislature, that can get in parliament, can affect the change that you really want. So yeah, I cede my time now to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Okay, our next speaker is Chris Wanamaker. He is the founder of Socialist Action and NDP Socialist Caucus in New Brunswick. He's also a social worker, a poet, and a radio broadcaster. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Elizabeth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good. I guess you can't see me, though. Now you can, I think, can't you? I think you can. Can you see me?
Well, I can't. Maybe the rest can. I can't see you.
No? Okay.
You have to turn on your camera, Chris.
Yeah. Okay, I did turn it on. So I turned it on again. I see myself. Does anybody else see me?
No, but we can hear you. So let's go with hearing you, and we'll figure out the rest.
Okay, so I would like to say a little bit about New Brunswick as a province, because I'm guessing that there might be one or two people outside New Brunswick who are.
You're on camera.
Good. So New Brunswick calls itself Canada's picture province. That was on the license plate for years. It may still be. New Brunswick has wonderful scenery, but if you look a little deeper, the picture is not that pretty. New Brunswick is also known as Canada's drive-through province. The province you drive through on the way to somewhere else. The literacy rate is about 50% among adults. 50%, that's 50%. New Brunswickers, if you have ever looked at them in the airport when they're waiting to take off, of course, that's not true today, maybe at this moment. But if you have ever been in the Toronto airport and you see New Brunswickers waiting for a flight, you may notice that they don't look quite as healthy. I hate to say it, but they don't look quite as healthy as people who are sitting in other lounges. St. John, New Brunswick, where I live, has had the distinction at times of having the highest child poverty rate in the country. 25% of children live in poverty in New Brunswick. Since 2019, New Brunswick has earned the distinction of being the poorest province in Canada. And because of the high level of poverty, more New Brunswickers report having cancer, heart disease, chronic obstructive lung disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, etc. They're being classified as obese. These are grim statistics, and I'm not wanting to be negative, but I think we have to face reality. The waiting time for hospital admissions or surgeries is twice as long in New Brunswick. And I'm told that things are worse in the northern part of the province, where the COVID rates are very high right now. The population in the province is aging. The province has experienced a great brain drain over the years. And as in other parts of the province, some of the province's nursing homes have been decimated lately by COVID. The birth rate, otherwise known as the fertility rate in New Brunswick, is declining significantly because people can't afford to have children anymore. And up until recently, many young New Brunswickers have moved to other provinces to find better opportunities. So the capitalists in New Brunswick complain that there aren't enough people in the labor force, and they can't hire enough people for minimum wage with no benefits. And they want to bring in more immigrants because of that. Now, because of COVID, more people are starting to stay here, but there's no more air travel service out of the province right at the moment. There will be maybe in a month or so, but not with Air Canada. Business or bus service rather has been cut back. There's currently a big rental crisis in the province. There are no rent controls. Rents are going up. There are rental coalitions beginning to form. Unemployment and inflation are at an all-time high. The province has a huge opioid and crystal meth problem, and some have said that the crystal meth problem, or crystal meth itself, is taking over the province. In 2016, Maclean's magazine had a front page article with the title, "Can Anything Save New Brunswick?" It described New Brunswick as a province divided along many lines, North against South, French against English, urban versus rural. It described it as a province with a stumbling economy and a crippling debt. The majority of PC governments have introduced extreme austerity, including the latest one, boasting that it has cut the deficit, or is about to cut the deficit in today's paper. Politically, provincial governments have switched back and forth between Liberals and Conservatives, and you would think that people would be so upset about what's going on that they would rebel. They are starting to, actually. I think that we're actually tapping into a groundswell of discontent that is bubbling beneath the surface. Things are so bad here that people have even asked, how long will it be before we join the state of Maine? St. John, where I live, has the largest oil refinery in the country, owned by Irving. The Irving family owns at least 250 companies, many of them numbered or going by different names. A lot of people don't realize that they're Irving companies. Irving controls most of the media in the province. The wealth of the Irving family is staggering. It has increased tremendously during the pandemic. Estimates range between $8 and $10 billion. Most of us can't even imagine what that is. It's well known that the Irvings have offshore tax havens, so they don't have to pay as much tax. During the TV debates in the last provincial election, our interim leader then, his name was Mackenzie Thompson, he publicly challenged the Irving monopoly in the province to pay its fair share of taxes. And it was a great moment, I thought. I couldn't remember it ever having been done before on TV election debates. There are other extremely wealthy families in the province, including the McCains and the Olens. So we need to convince New Brunswickers that they have been voting against their own interest. And as Chris Thompson gave a wonderful history of the NDP, it hasn't made a great impact, to say the least. So to address this situation, the New Brunswick NDP Socialist Caucus has passed a number of resolutions. It wants to be brought forward at the next New Brunswick NDP Policy Convention, and those resolutions concern nationalization of Irving, nationalization of the fossil fuel industry, homelessness, poverty, housing first, rent control, wage control, full employment, health reforms, free education, decriminalization of drug use, establishment of safe injection sites, etc., all of which would help level the playing field. So, and we have decided to be as inclusive as possible in our approach. And I think we're on to something. I think we're on to something good. I think we're on to something big. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, our next speaker is John Nuttal. John is 24 and joined the NDP at the old age of 14. He is a carpenter and the executive assistant to the interim leader of the New Brunswick NDP. John is also the Socialist Caucus rep to the NDP, New Brunswick NDP Provincial Council, and recently joined Socialist Action. Welcome, John.
Hello. My role in the party is mostly just whatever needs to be done, I'll do it. I want to talk a bit about some information that's been missed so far about the state of the province. and the capture of New Brunswick as by the financial interests, which is actually quite it's quite a phenomena. The Irving family and the other richer families less so, in the McCains and the Olins, have captured New Brunswick in a way that's hard to understand if you live here, and it's even harder to understand looking in. It's hard to understand when you live here because it's hard to fight against them. When I was younger, when I was about 15 or 16, I remember talking to someone from out of province who I had met, and I made the joke at the time that when you're born in New Brunswick, you're born a serf to the Irving family, and it's it's dark. It's not that bad. We do have more rights than a serf would have, but it's very close. The majority of the industry and economy in the province is dependent upon the Irving's, well, it's perceived to be dependent upon the Irving's continued economic support in the province. And it's really hard for people to want to stand up to that. And it's really difficult for them to want to fight back against that. And as Chris Wanamaker pointed out, we're starting to see a bit of a groundswell of people be open about complaining about the Irvings. And that's rare. It's very, very rare in New Brunswick to see people openly confront the Irvings. And even recently, one of the most astounding things that I saw was Minister Holland, who's the Minister of Natural Resources, who is only one riding, actually, he lives minutes from my house, sent a letter to a board that's in charge of oversight on the cost of fuel. Most of the people in the province heat their homes with Irving fuel. It's one of the many ways they have control over the province. And he sent a letter to try and pressure that board into supporting them, supporting the Irvings and increasing their wealth. They wanted an extra $60 million a year from the very poor people of this province to pay for the heating, and they wanted to up those rates immediately in the winter when people are struggling during this pandemic. And their claim to want this was that they weren't making enough money, even though they've, as Wanamaker has pointed out, they've increased their wealth by billions of dollars during the course of the pandemic. And that's just one example of the level of corruption. It's this really interesting thing where we are, in many ways, a captured state. And the news media doesn't need to be told not to say anything about the Irvings. They just don't do it. People don't need to be told to not try and start a union in the Irving company. They just don't do it. It's to the point where people know that they self-regulate themselves when they try to figure out what to do with their relationship to the Irvings. And so when we're trying to get people to speak up against that or to feel that they have the strength to do something about that, it's extremely difficult to convince those people to risk what little, and I mean little, this province competes with the other Atlantic provinces to be the poorest province, with some of the lowest median wages in the country. It's hard to convince people like that, who barely have the time to even think about it, to stand up to an entrenched interest that, like the Irving family. And I remember in my economics classes, one of my professors pointed out that for all intents and purposes, the province is a captured state. It's really, really, really difficult to see anyone want to stand up to that. And that's why seeing little bits and pieces throughout the past year of CBC even, which didn't normally criticize the Irvings very much, even though they have all the financial backing of the federal government, it's still very risky for a group that's not even owned by the Irvings to criticize the Irvings. They're starting to take the bold step to criticize the Irvings more. That's where the story about Minister Holland came from. And so seeing that little bit of groundswell, seeing that and hearing it on a day-to-day basis, I'm a carpenter. I work with the working class people. The median wage for a carpenter in the province is $18 an hour, where $16 an hour. I just checked it yesterday to see if I was getting a fair wage, and which I am. The carpenters in BC can make upwards of $70 an hour. My sister's fiance works in BC. He makes $70 an hour as a carpenter. I only make 18, and it's because the Irvings have control over that industry, and it's really difficult for us to build labor support in those industries and build and convince the people that are making such a terrible wage, the working class people, that they should stand up. And seeing that develop has been really inspiring, and it's what's pushed the Socialist Caucus, and it's what's pushed me personally to move towards some of the policies that we've been proposing. And as Chris Thompson said, a lot of that has to do with coalition building. And Chris Wanamaker pointed out that there's new tenants unions that are forming. And we've already reached out to those tenant unions as soon as we found out that they were starting. And we're getting people from those tenant unions involved in our caucus and involved with the party. And we have people who work with the homeless and have worked with the homeless for years now and go on the streets and are therapists for them. And they're helping build our housing policies. And when we look at Indigenous communities, we go and talk to the Indigenous communities and we say, come join the party, come join the caucus. We will back you as much as we can as a party. Create the policy that you want, that you need, for the problems that you experience and have, and we'll back it. And that's what we've been doing to form a coalition, is to say, this province doesn't provide you the voice because all the voice is given to the Irvings. The premier of the province is the former finance minister of the Irvings. And when we get those people together and we give them an opportunity to join the party and push their policies and have a voice, it is encouraging to see them jump on that opportunity. And that's what we've been doing in the party and what we've been fighting.
Thank you very much, John. Now I'm pleased to welcome Natasha Akhtar. She has been an NDP supporter since becoming a Canadian citizen in 2011. She joined the Socialist Caucus prior to running as a candidate in New Brunswick's 2020 provincial election. She is also a founding member of the New Brunswick NDP Women's Caucus. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. So hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Elizabeth. I have been a long time, well, as long as I've been a citizen in Canada, I have been a supporter of the NDP. And that's when I started looking around for political parties that align with my views. And my interest initially was admittedly because of the very openly inclusive nature of the party, not only towards socioeconomically disadvantaged people, but also towards all marginalized people, including Indigenous people and ethnocultural minorities. This respect that was extended to these people by the national leaders, I noted even when it cost them some popularity. This I found that touching, and it prompted me to sign up and volunteer and support the party any way I could. I was invited to the Socialist Caucus by a long-term party veteran who runs a Facebook page for like-minded people, and he noted that our views aligned and invited me to attend the Socialist Caucus. And as it really is the unofficial sort of heart of the New Brunswick NDP, and I really appreciated the very thoughtful and very really in-depth discussions about economic equity and social justice. And I was, from then, I was asked to be a founding member of the Women's Caucus for the New Brunswick NDP, which I think is a really solid initiative because although socialism is the founding principle of the NDP, in order to connect with voters, because them as the other gentlemen have mentioned, we have had that challenge with connecting with a broad-based section of voters in New Brunswick. you do need to be mindful that a lot of our voters have a lot of diverse needs, and these need to be at least addressed and talked about. And we do need to sort of bring out all the facets of our platform, as well as very specific ones related to economic equity. And you have to look at things that are issues that are predominantly not, I mean, they're not all women's issues, but they tend to be issues that are prioritized by a lot of women. So this is obviously something that is a part of the platform. But in order to connect with people, you do need to bring these issues out and speak to them frequently, and in a language that people will understand. Because from what I saw with the Socialist Caucus, that we had people, very bright people with a lot of high-minded ideas, which are the core of the party, and that's why I joined. But you need to be able to translate them in a way that the average person is going to understand. And as some of my other colleagues mentioned, we have to consider that there is a 50% functional literacy rate in New Brunswick. So that has to inform your message and how you deliver it. And I know that getting back to the Women's Caucus, which is what my primary sort of one of my primary roles within the party. I know that the other main sort of progressive party in the province, which is the Liberal Party, now the Greens are doing well as well, but it's always been the Liberal Party which has been progressive, and they've always sort of posed themselves as the women's rights party. But from my perspective, as a woman who is an ethnocultural minority, I felt that those causes that were being promoted by the Liberal Party were very cherry picked, popular causes, and they did not affect all women. And it was very sort of, again, very cherry picked, and I found it performative. It wasn't, it didn't come across as genuine to me. And they did not take into account the additional barriers to economic and social mobility that minority women have. So I do feel that the Women's Caucus is the place to be able to, promote these resolutions, and that would seek to uplift all women. So all women and really all Canadians are able to access the same opportunities, which will help them to take themselves out of the cycle of poverty or the cycle of dependency, which happens if you don't, have those opportunities. So I would also like to, I've continued my involvement with the Socialist Caucus because I see it as a sort of the intellectual core of the party, and that's where the ideas are coming from. And those are great ideas, and they're deeply connected with the roots of the NDP. But I think that you need to have a sort of a variety of all kinds of voices, and to be able to bring as many people who are like-minded to the table. And along with the push for economic equity, which is the guiding principle of the Socialist Caucus, you also need to keep in mind that you have to pay attention to social justice, because otherwise you're not ensuring equality for all Canadians. And that is ultimately the goal of the NDP, is as I see it, is it's a very sort of it's very who've always been true to their principles from what I've seen on the national stage. And I would really like to see New Brunswick give it a chance and allow it to be part of the governing structure, because I think it would really make a difference. That's it.
Okay. Okay, thank you very, very much, Natasha. And I want to let our listening audience know that the reason Natasha spoke last was because of technical problems. Okay, so I want to thank you all again. And now, without the help of our technical producer, Kurt, we will get into the Q&A. So, Kurt, would you put the first three questions in the chat column? And each of you have, 4 minutes to answer the questions. And the lineup will be, we will have John first, then Chris T, then Natasha, then Chris W. So you have up to 4 minutes to answer 1, 2, or 3 questions. And here are the questions. Kurt?
Okay, so our first question comes from Barry Weisletter. He asks, the Socialist Caucus in New Brunswick gained official status within the New Brunswick NDP years ago, which the NDP has refused us in other provinces. How did you succeed in getting status, including reps on PC? Daniel Terade asks, is there a push for electoral reform within the New Brunswick? Proportional representation would be nice. And Spencer Roshi asks, Bernie Sanders and all are making socialism a more popular term and have a strong following. Why doesn't the NDP lean harder into the concept of socialism to differentiate itself from the other two mainstream parties?
Okay, and for once again, for the listening audience, PC is actually means provincial council. Okay, so you have 4 minutes each, and John will start, then Chris T, Natasha, and Chris W. John?
I could probably handle the first question the best. A person named Will, oh shit, I can't remember Will's last name. Will, everyone just knows him as Will. William Blanchette, Will Blanchette. He wriggled his way into the executive under Carty somehow and became the finance minister, or the finance secretary somehow, and managed to get enough support on executive when Carty left to convince them that we should create caucuses and to give those caucuses 2 seats each on provincial council. Youth would have a seat on the executive, and women's forum was to be created as well, which is the women's caucus. It's sort of interchangeable. And executive seat on the provincial council, the executive for the women's forum. It was really Will that managed to pull that off. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he got the votes. I know he was, talking to people, doing internal politics. And I came into the party after that, but that's what happened. It was Will working really, really hard to convince the powers that be that we should create caucuses and give those caucuses each a seat. And then he said, and we'll let the membership decide what those caucuses that will be created will be. And then Chris Wanamaker, myself, Will, Mackenzie Thompson, we all formed a caucus, the Socialist Caucus, and we got those 2 seats that we were allotted as a caucus, because Will managed to convince the right people and at the right time to have that opportunity. Is there a push for electoral reform within New Brunswick? Not really. It's part of the platform of the Greens. It's been the part of the platform of the NDP, I believe. And it's not really strong. People aren't thinking about that sort of thing. There's not a lot of big movements in the province that hold a lot of traction, that get a lot of attention. It's mostly just whatever comes from the government, the occasional protest, like some of the protests we had on abortion rights, and it's mostly dark. And the really difficult thing is that the Irvings control most of the media that people consume in the province beyond the social media. And so it's really hard to start a movement and do those things. I know a person within our caucus, whose name is Armand, has been working really hard on proportional representation. He's run a few times as a candidate, and he's very passionate about this. I wish he was here to speak on it. Why did the NDP lean harder into the concept of socialism did differentiate from the other two major parties? That's what we're trying to do in New Brunswick. Federally, I think it has to do with entrenched interest from the not Broadbent era. What was his name? I'm sure the federal issue is much different. Internally, as Chris laid out in the history of the party, it's mostly because the centrists have had a lot of control, and and we're trying to push it in that direction right now. So why don't we? Well, we are, and hopefully it will continue, and we can create some institutional changes that will allow it to continue.
Okay, thank you, John. Chris Thompson?
Alrighty, so question 1. Socialist Caucus in New Brunswick gained official status within the NDP years ago, but has been refused in other provinces. How did we succeed? Well, John covered most of it, so I'll basically just emphasize hard work. There's one thing that I've learned. I've been involved in politics for less than a year now as actual public face and working internally in parties outside from just volunteer work. It's surprising the amount you can get done if you and a couple good people just give it your best. With that being said, as I talked about in my presentation, the New Brunswick NDP is not the most established or large political party in the country. So there was a bit of a power vacuum, and we could basically show up during that time and say, since we're the ones willing to do the organization, willing to do the work, become established. But if you're in a province where you're not officially recognized, or federally where it's not officially recognized, find out who has the votes, find out how you can get people on to get the votes. It's easier said than done, and just do your best, and you might be surprised at actually what you're able to accomplish. So many people that are supporters, even if it's not their most important thing, as I discussed earlier, self-identify to some degree as a socialist. And most people, even if they don't, think that democracy is important. And so most people are going to be in favor of official recognizing from the party. It's just a matter of actually getting those votes. Just put in the work and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, try it again. Is there a push for electoral reform within New Brunswick? Proportional representation would be nice. Yeah, again, as John said, it's on both the Green and the NDP's platform. Unfortunately, there's not a big push for anything in New Brunswick. Most people here are very, very, very apathetic. So what do? You can push and try and get people on your side. And I think if you polled people in New Brunswick, and I'm not sure if this has been done, but I would guess a majority of them would be in favor of electoral reform. But no one cares enough to be out on the streets. So I mean, that's a question for people smarter than me. Why is that? How do we fix that? That's what we have to think about. Bernie Sanders and others are making socialism a more popular term and have a strong following. Why doesn't the NDP lean harder into the concept of socialism to differentiate themselves from the other two mainstream parties? Well, there was this really long thing in the 20th century called the Cold War, and it made a lot of people very, very antsy around the terms of socialism and communism. So that can be voters who are maybe older in age, and that can also be political strategists who think it would be bad strategy. But that's a problem that's going to be solved with good work on our behalf, as well as time. If you start polling younger people, you see that they're much, much more willing to support, like have a positive view of socialism. In fact, I think most people under 30 now have a positive vision of socialism, but not of capitalism, and that's not true of older generations. So this sort of thing changes as time goes on. The most important thing to do is work on building organizations and never, ever put your values aside or anything. If someone asks me, if Irving Run Media asks me in New Brunswick, I will tell them I'm a socialist. But I also really want to focus on, and Natasha spoke to this really well, is focusing on real things that are affecting real people's lives in the day-to-day. So you don't compromise your values, but you also look at people and you say, okay, what's the problem? Can you not put food on the table? Well, you're not making enough money. Here's a union representative that I've organized with who might be able to help you unionize so you can make more money. And then if you end up helping that person's well-being, they'll call themselves whatever they want because you've done some real work to actually help them, and they'll be on board. But there's a lot of propaganda that's gone into socialism. That's why people are scared. But we can't worry too much about propaganda. We just have to do the best work we can.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Natasha, 4 minutes.
I will just pass to Chris because this is a socialist caucus related question, so there are 4 members. I'll just let it pass it to Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Natasha. Chris Wanamaker, 4 minutes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. One of the things that I think is intriguing about the Socialist Caucus is from the get-go, from the start, we came up with the decision to be as inclusive as possible. We wanted to create an inclusive environment where everyone feels welcome, with special regards to groups such as women, Indigenous people, Acadians, LGBTQ+, newcomers, racialized people, people of all abilities, and people of all socioeconomic backgrounds. And with the term socialism, I mean, you can use other terms as well, such as anti-capitalist work, anti-sexism, anti-racism, anti-colonialism, dismantling systems of oppression, including marginalized communities. So we've actually made that a founding principle of the caucus. And in some ways, I've tried to, in my initial somewhat fledgling attempts to co-chair meetings, I tried to actually go around and give everybody a voice. One of the things that concerns me about the caucus is that the smart, articulate people tend to dominate the meetings, as maybe in some ways they should. But I also think that we need to give people a political voice in New Brunswick. And I think that if you start that process of inclusion, giving everybody a voice, a voice at the table, so to speak, that we can really move forward. And then in some cases, I think labels, it's really interesting. I work in mental health, and we talk about diagnoses of people and giving them a label, like for depression or anxiety or some kind of mental health disorder. Sometimes that can be helpful, and sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes labels can move people forward, and sometimes not. Right? Socialism is a wonderful word. I think it's a fabulous word. I think it can mobilize people. I think it's attracted people. People are wondering, socialist? What does that mean? What is this about? You know, they've come to our meetings just out of curiosity, but that's fine. That's great. We want people to come to our meetings out of curiosity. But then people start to kind of broaden their perspective. That socialism is more than just economic. It's very inclusive of all the different groups. And so I think the NDP have a united front, so to speak, with different coalitions, as Chris Thompson has been talking about. I think that's the way to go.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to go back to our producer for more questions. And I think we're going to have to take 4 questions this time. I know it seems a lot, and we don't we're only going to get 4 minutes as well. And the lineup will be Chris Wanamaker, Natasha, John, and Christy. And the only thing I can suggest is maybe to pick and choose your questions if you'd like to go that route, so we can get everybody speaking and get all the questions answered. So, Kurt, go ahead. Hello, Kurt, Mr. Producer.
Sorry, I was just arranging the questions.
Okay.
One moment. So our first question comes from Dinner with Franklin. He asks, are the New Brunswick NDP finding groups are receptive to working with you? Our next question comes from Rosemary Hinatiuk, who asks, do any of the speakers think that basic income were implemented federally or provincially, that the NDP population would be in a better position to stand up to the stranglehold of the Irvings? And the Canadian commie asks, I lived in New Brunswick for a year, and the entire time I was there, everyone I talked to were NDPers voting Liberal because they felt everyone else was voting Liberal. Can you speak to this? And then Andrew asks, would a federal job guarantee help New Brunswick so as to not rely so much on corporations?
I'd
Okay,
like to speak to that last question, if I could.
okay. You have 4 minutes, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think the business of jobs is a really important one right now. 1/4 of the businesses apparently are said to be going under as a result of COVID. The jobs in New Brunswick tend to be minimum wage, no benefits. John spoke well to the difference between what he makes in New Brunswick versus what carpenters would make in BC. I think jobs is a huge issue. There are lots of people who have given up looking for work, and I think a federal job guarantee would help New Brunswick. I think it would be a wonderful option. I don't know why with COVID that we aren't putting all of the people who are not working to work with, say, public infrastructure, right, or paying them to actually help out with the COVID fight in some way. I think there are other countries that are doing that, and yet we don't seem to be doing that. So yeah, so I just say yes to that question.
Okay, so Natasha?
So the question on the Canadian economy. So I could speak to that for a bit. I also noticed this, and I was very troubled by it because I felt that there were a lot of people who identified as NDP supporters nationally, and they were indeed voting Liberal, mostly because they felt that there was no chance for the NDP to win in New Brunswick, so they felt that they would be losing their vote. And even more recently, younger, more progressive people who are disenchanted with the Liberals because of all the corruption have started voting Green because we had a breakthrough win recently, and they felt that maybe that's the direction younger people are headed. So it comes down to who people think can win, and that's why I think it's very important to really be practical in our approach when we're speaking to voters. And it's great to have, the ideals, and you have to stick to your ideals, otherwise you're a sellout like other parties are. But you absolutely do need to break it down to people and see what they need and speak to that. And the NDP does have a platform that speaks to those things. It's simply that you have to really be very specific and very simple. And it's again, we have to take into account that this is a largely a rural province, and a lot of people have, very simple sort of um, needs when it comes to, for example, we don't even have, high-speed internet in some rural areas. So these are things that you have to look at the practical side. And there is also another reason why people vote Liberal here, which is there's a language divide. Unfortunately, this is a bilingual province. There's a very obvious language divide where you have most of the Anglophone population voting Conservative and most of the Francophone population voting Liberal, simply because they feel their interests are going to be represented. So there's a lot of regional reasons, and these can be overcome. But it it's good to have ideals, and I support that. We say we have to stick to our ideals, but you do have to look strategically at why people keep voting for one party instead of the party that they really believe in, and you have to be able to sort of reach them um, by speaking to their concerns and being strategic about it. So
Okay, thank you, Natasha. John?
I believe the second question and the third question are really interesting to look at. One doesn't necessarily answer the other. If the basic income was implemented, I don't think we would necessarily see people not feel as influenced by the Irvings, and it's got to do with them being such an entrenched interest. I think it's something like a third of the province's economy is either directly an Irving job or wouldn't exist without the Irving's business. And so when one family, and they're not a public corporation, they're just a collection of companies run by family members that coordinate with each other. They're private companies. When they have so much authority, even having basic income won't necessarily free people from that grasp, because there's more to it than just the economic grasp. There's a larger on a psychological level. There's a grasp they have on the province, and there's the other issue of what are the entrenched political interests. The premier is used to be a chief financial officer for one of the major Irving companies. I believe it was the oil one, J.D. Irving, I believe. And the Liberals, the last premier from the Liberal Party, personally knew several of the Irvings. That's where he got his financial backing. He sort of came out of nowhere in New Brunswick politics. He had no background. He was very young, and all of a sudden he was able to take command of the Liberal Party and win the election. Most of it had to do with the fact that he knew the Irvings. Dominic Carty managed to get his position in the Conservative Party as a minister, coming from the leader of the NDP into the Conservative Party, because he knew Irvings personally that would give the maximum campaign contribution. It costs the PCs $300,000 to win the election and get a majority of the province. $300,000. That's like one federal riding in Toronto. It doesn't take much. That's how poor we are and how apathetic we are. And so there'll be more to it than just meeting people's basic needs. There's really a psychological break we have to give. And that's really, really difficult to overcome because it's entrenched, and it's been entrenched for generations, really. And it's going on to a third generation with new people coming up, new younger people in the Irving family coming to take over the more senior positions in the companies. And until we're able to break people of this fear and this hold, it's going to be extremely difficult if we just meet their basic needs. There has to be more than that, and I don't know if a basic income will do it. It's really sad. I think it's helpful. We obviously need it, but I don't know if it'll do it. There's more work to it than that. It's more complicated.
Okay, thank you, John. Chris T. Thompson?
Alrighty, so I'll start with the first question. Are the NDP funding groups receptive to working with you? Yeah. Yeah, everyone's really nice in person. I could talk to Blaine Higgs. I'm sure he'd be super nice. I could talk to people who work with the Irvings. They'd be super nice. But beyond that, groups that are ideologically aligned with us are very, very, very open to having discussions. And in a province that's so apathetic, as we've talked about a lot, no one is reaching out to these people. Not the Liberals, not the Greens, and certainly not the Conservatives. So that counts for a lot. People are worried about, especially when you come from a political party, about getting too involved because they don't want to see it as like an endorsement one way or the other, so that people like the government would continue to work with them or start working with them. So that can be a concern. But for the most part, actually not for the most part, every single conversation I've had with an independent organization, they've been very, very happy and grateful that we reached out to them. And it's something that doesn't happen here. I'm not sure about other provinces, but if you're find yourself in a similar position to us, highly recommend reaching out to activist groups, labor, stuff like that. Everyone appreciated it. No one's going to give you a hard time. I lived in New Brunswick for a year, and the entire time I was there, everyone I talked to were NDPers voting Liberal because they felt everyone was voting Liberal. Can you speak to this? Yeah, people vote for who they think are going to win. If you look at polls, we are not the last place party in New Brunswick. The People's Alliance are. But when election time comes around, they have a couple seats that people think that they can win, so they do win a couple seats. That's how it goes. We pull ahead of them in most polls, and that's just is what it is. You can't be weak. I'll say that. There are people who are involved in our party right now and outside of it who think that we should be stepping on our tiptoes, that the party shouldn't be making too many waves, or say the Socialist Caucus shouldn't be making too many waves. I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a bulldozer sometimes, but I just say, to hell with that. You gotta, well, you have a voice. You gotta use it, and you gotta tell people what you think, and listen, and just engage and have conversations. But don't be weak. Don't tell people you think you're going to lose or you're not prepared for an election or anything. Just go through it. Do the best you can. Anytime someone asks you, tell them you think you're going to win. Why not? Just do it. It'll, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But don't be weak.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go back to our producer, Kurt, for the last 4 questions. And you will get 4 minutes each to answer again. And the lineup will be Natasha, John, Chris W., and giving the last word to Chris T., the interim leader. So go ahead, Kurt.
All right. Our first question comes from, I'm going to mess up this name, but it's Agnieszka Marszaleka. Natasha. Question goes, Natasha, is there a women's caucus for the NDP in Ontario? Okay, and the next question comes from Barry Weisletter. He asks, the Socialist Caucus says rebuild a New Brunswick NDP as a socialist working class party. Starting in the workplace and the streets, will socialists join with the New Brunswick Federal Federation of Labor to take job action to defeat the Hague's government wage freeze imposed on public service workers? Show that socialists are about action, not just slogans to liberate workers from the dictates of big business and their government tools. Daniel Tereda asks, are any unions affiliated with the NDP in New Brunswick? And Rosemary Nadiak asks, are you not saying that we should be taking a principled approach? Third way, and we're not non-ideological. The unspoken ideology is the adherence to capitalism.
Okay, so you've got the questions. You have 4 minutes. You can answer the ones that you wish. Natasha.
So I'll answer the one that's addressed to me, is Ontario Women's Caucus for the NDP in Ontario. And from my information, there is. It's separate from the federal branch, and it's a women's committee which works to encourage the participation of women in the political process and is an organizing space to advance women's rights and to counter sexism and gender equality. Under Andrea Haworth's leadership, she's the first woman to lead the Ontario NDP. Women New Democrats were leading the way, and that's from the Ontario NDP website.
Okay, thank you very much. John?
Are there any trade unions affiliated with the the NDP in New Brunswick? There absolutely is. Like every other NDP, the unions are officially affiliated with the party. Carty actually wrote them out of our constitution because they wouldn't kowtow to what he wanted. Really cringy. Makes me upset. I really don't like Carty, and that's putting it nicely. The Labour has, for some unknown reason, in my mind, stuck with the party very, very strongly, except for under Carty's leadership, because he booted them out. But even then, they came back. when we offered them, when we wrote them back in. They decided that they were more than willing to come back. They're more than willing to work with us. One of the people in my RDA who I've worked with multiple times over the years on different elections, federally and provincially, is the vice president of the New Brunswick Federation of Labor. The labor leaders of CUPE New Brunswick and the New Brunswick Federation of Labor have seats on our executive. They have direct power within the party structure on a daily basis, and they have seats on provincial council. And the Socialist Caucus is working really, really hard to go to the Labor Caucus, which also exists, and say, look, what do you need from us? Where do you want the votes to go? We'll vote how Labor needs us to vote, because we want to make sure, and we'll get the votes we need when we need the votes, because we want to make sure that Labor knows no one like Cardi will have any chance of getting Labor kicked out of the party ever again. They will be the strong core of the party, and they need to be. And we're encouraging them to step up, and we're encouraging them to help us reach out to the North Shore. We have really, really great leads, really, really great organizers up north from Labor that are really encouraged to work with us, and it's really exciting to see that even after a terrible leader like Cardi, who was nothing but vitriolic towards them and authoritarian to them, that they're still willing to work with us, and they're excited to work with us, and they're itching to work with us, and we're really happy about that. And it's something that we've been working on for a while under several different leaders, interim leaders, and the executive, and it's really makes us happy. It's one of our big victories in the past few years.
Okay, thank you, John. Chris Wanamaker?
Yes, I see that Rosemary has a question. Are you not saying that we should be taking a principled approach, third way, and we're not non-ideological? The unspoken ideology was that of capitalism. So I think that's a really good question. I think the thing that has distinguished the Socialist Caucus, in my view, have been 3 resolutions about nationalization, and they were passed in the very first meetings that we had. And one of them is, of course, nationalization of Irving. Be it resolved that an NDP government will enact legislation to nationalize the Irving group of companies and seize all assets of said companies. I mean, that is an incredible resolution. Yeah, you may be considered, in some ways, maybe we're doing pre-revolutionary work, but I would love to get that passed at the NDP convention. And I would love that to become an issue in the election. And if we could make that an issue, I think it would distinguish the party from the other parties, and it would speak to the socialist set of values that we have. The other resolutions are, be it resolved that large companies will be nationalized so that the people of New Brunswick realize the benefits as opposed to the few. And finally, there's a resolution that says, be it resolved that an NDP government will, let's see here, will commence lawsuits seeking damages against these corporations. So I think those resolutions, I think they're smart. I think they're clear. I think they're cutting. I think they get right to the point. I think that if we can put agenda items like that front and center in an NDP policy convention and then in an election, I think that would absolutely distinguish the party and give it that principled kind of edge that we need.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Chris Thompson. Unmute yourself.
Whoops.
Mr. Interim Leader.
Oh, I don't know how technology works. Questions 2 and 3 about unions being affiliated with the NDP in New Brunswick and specifically working with the New Brunswick Federation of Labor. Heck yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of that. We have been doing a lot of that. There's a lot of work that needs to be done because as John spoke about, their Labour has almost oddly stuck around with the party and been very, very, very loyal, which we greatly appreciate. And even throughout the times where they were, Dominic Carty tried to push them out of the party. So we are going to be working on liberating workers from the dictates of big business and their government tools, just like Barry Weisletter said. So yeah, we have the president and vice president of the New Brunswick Federation of Labour, and then we have the president of CUPE, who are all members of the party on our provincial council. They're members on executive too. It's really great that they're there. They're super helpful, experienced organizers that we want to be working with more and more in the future. And the final question, I think, was directed at me. Are you not saying that we should be taking a principled approach, third way, and where we're not non-ideological? The unspoken ideology is the adherence to capitalism. So I agree with that. They were ideological in the adherence to capitalism, sure. What I'm saying is that their political policies weren't based on any sort of principle that they weren't willing to throw away for self-interest, and not in every case. Like specifically with Weir, I don't think that applies. But what I am saying is that well, I'll give an example. Dominic Carty ran on a very pro-choice platform, and when he was in the NDP, and just last month he stood up and voted with the government to make sure that women wouldn't have abortion access in New Brunswick, even though it's federal law that we need to. So now activist groups have to take them to court because someone who didn't have actual principles decided that they were going to throw them out the window for self-gain the next time they thought they could grab power. So that's what I'm saying. It's not that they have no ideology at all. It tends to often be self-interest, and self-interest tends to align itself with capitalism. That's why politicians are all capitalists. I don't think it's that these people grow up and go, I really love capitalism. It's that they want what's best for them. And capitalism is very good at giving people who are corruptible what's best for them. That was the point that I was trying to make. And I think that's all my answers for those questions.
Okay, good. Okay, so special thanks to Natasha, to Chris Thompson, to Chris Wanamaker, and John Nuttal, and also, of course, to Kurt Young, our producer in Mississauga. Please consider being a supporter of Socialist Action newspaper, which we will send to you online. To fill out the form, just visit us at www.socialistaction.ca. And if you would like to talk to us about joining SA, write to socialistactioncanada@gmail.com, or just call us at 647-986-1917. That's not 647-986-1917. Once again, folks, if you like the show, please subscribe to the Socialist Action YouTube. The next Socialist Action webcast will be Mental Health on Campus with Emily Stairs in Guelph and Daniel Cherade and Alex Badella in Toronto, and probably others on the panel. That webcast will take place on Thursday, February the 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For the details, just visit www.socialistaction.ca. In the meantime, please be safe, stay healthy, stay active. Bye for now.